Grouping is a powerful technique for organizing your data or any data. It allows you to understand the significance of a field or fields by categorizing each message based on the field you group on. Say we have 3 messages with 3 fields displayed, and now we group by gender. The resulting messages are separated into groups using gender as a key. The grouping header tells you how many of that type there are. This gives you a quick idea of what gender is because you can see the different unique names that are used, which are male and female in this case. The count gives you an idea of how important that value is. And the group is not limited to one level, so you could group by gender and age, for example. Grouping is used in different places in Message Analyzer, but the most obvious examples are 2 viewers, the analysis grid and the grouping viewer. As a note, groupings are just a configuration option for each of these layouts. Let's use this trace to use groupings to categorize the traffic. First, a tooltip at the top reminds you about this helpful feature. But you can regain real estate by simply Xing out that section. By right-clicking any column in the UI, we can choose to group, and that makes the results collated like you see here. A module grouping box is shown at the top where we display the current groupings. Here you can remove or reorder your groupings. If you had a message selected, like I did, the result might not be obvious since we maintain your selection to keep context. However, you can right-click the grouping box and collapse all so that you see all the groupings. Now, not only do you realize that module is related to protocols at this point, you can tell which protocols are present in this trace, their numbers, and quickly scan the various examples. Groupings can also be nested. Next, I'll group by the process name, though I'll use the Details window and select the Process Mode button. And now I can see a list of properties for the selected message. I can right-click the fields here or use the Add Selected Item as Grouping button to add the second level of grouping. Now I'll collapse all the modules again, and let's look at one, the NBTNS, and now we can see the processes that have been involved in that type of traffic. I can repivot my groupings by dragging the grouping box, and when I get in the appropriate location, these little red arrows show up. Hitting the red X removes the grouping. And yet another way to add grouping is via the field column chooser. Now, there's another way to group, using a separate group view. You access the grouping view, like any other view, through the New Viewer global menu. We'll choose the default grouping view. The default for me is to group by network address and then by transport, which is the TCP UDP port conversation. This is similar to the network monitored conversation tree, and the interaction is meant to be similar as well. The grouping view is special in a few ways. First, it opens to the left side of your data. This leads to the second special behavior because when you select a node in the grouping viewer, for instance this one here, it shows you messages and filters by this node that I've selected on over the whole session. So any other viewer I have open will get filtered based on what I've selected in the tree. Now if you don't want this behavior, you could open another session to view your data that is not filtered. Finally, it's special because you can only open one instance of the grouping viewer. And the reason we do this is that you can just imagine the chaos and the confusion you might have if you had multiple views all filtering your session. So nothing happens here when I hit default. You can collapse and expand the data, again by right-clicking on the grouping box header. But we also expose these buttons in the toolbar to expand all and collapse all. As with the analysis grid, we can add or remove groupings from the details window and as well from the field chooser. However, it's pretty easy to get confused sometimes because remember, it adds the grouping to the active view, which is shown by the blue tab. So if my expectations, now that this tab is highlighted and I find some details, it's going to add the grouping viewer to the analysis grid rather than the grouping view. Let's select a node in the grouping view to drive filtering in the analysis grid. You can also select multiple nodes by control-clicking as you select, which lets you see how two conversations interact. Also, notice the reminder in the filtering area to tell you that a grouping filter has been applied. Sometimes you can forget and create filters on top of the grouping filter, which then results in no messages being displayed. To revert the grouping filter, you can use the reset in the grouping toolbar. Another feature lets you change the mode, and instead of filtering the messages by using this button, you can change it into a selection mode, and now the relevant messages are selected rather than filtered. And this kind of acts as a quick color rule and lets you see these messages in context of the other ones. And one of the greatest advantages of the grouping view is that you can independently filter that view like any other view. A filter control does not show by default, but we can add one by hitting Add Filter. Now, let's filter the data by HTTP traffic to see which conversations use that particular protocol. Now, when you select a node, you see the count of the messages doesn't exactly match the number of messages you see. So we'll change back to filtering mode and see here that we see 3 messages, yet on this side we see much more than 3. See, when you select a node, it's applying the filter based on the selection. And so the filter is derived from the TCP, ports being the same, and the IP addresses. However, the filter that shows up here does not get applied to the data. So we see both the TCP messages and HTTP, but if we were going to count up how many HTTP related messages there were, that does match the number 3 on the other side. As we saw, grouping is a very powerful tool for dissecting and diagnosing traffic. You can learn so much about what your data is by grouping various fields to understand their makeup. Hope you find this tool as helpful as I do. Bye for now.